everyone. Welcome back to another episode with the Crime and Coffee Couple. My name's Allison.
Yeah, my name's Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Good. You look good. Did you put on some new makeup today or something?
I didn't. No.
Standard makeup?
Standard makeup.
Okay.
Maybe I'm just having a good face day today. Who the heck knows?
Yeah, you have a good face day most days.
There are certain days that I just look at my skin and I'm like, ugh.
Join the club. For you specifically. Like me, I think I'm fine. But
Oh, I think you're gorgeous.
Thank you very much.
You're
I'm just
welcome.
kidding. I'm just kidding. So if you're new here, yeah, we just have a little intro usually before we dive into these dark, horrible stories and just to kind of have a little chit chat, a little back and forth. One of our listeners, they said they wanted to check out our new setup that we have here at the Crime and Coffee Couple Coffee Shop. And they said, you know what, it'd be nice to have some biscuits. And I said, you know what, let's put out a biscuit. Let's put out some Milano cookies here, Pepperidge Farm. So
why don't we say biscuits in the United States unless we're referring to the flaky actual biscuits?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just how we do things. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, do they have like biscuits and gravy or something like that?
No,
like,
they're just like cookies.
Right.
And same thing with tea. Like in the United States, people are often like, oh, I'm not feeling good. I'm going to make a cup of tea. It's like, well, that's just standard in the UK.
Yeah, in the US, like I automatically associate any kind of tea with being sick.
So do our kids.
Yeah. I've been drinking yerba mate more recently. I don't know if you guys are into that at all.
And that's more of a South American drink.
More like tea based.
Yeah.
It seems like tea, but it's its own thing. So it's it's a little different feeling than regular caffeine from coffee.
Is it more mellow?
Yeah, it's almost like, I don't want to say psychedelic. There's no psychedelic, but there's definitely like a buzz. So it's worth trying out, I'd say.
And it's a good buzz, not like a jittery buzz.
If your kids are listening, I would turn this down right now, but I'd say any buzz is a good buzz in my opinion.
I wouldn't agree with that.
Well, although except for like cigarettes, like we used to, I mean, back in the day, back in our roaring 20s.
Rarely would we ever touch a cigarette, but you know.
Might bum a dart from somebody while you're drinking.
Dart.
Yeah, just kind of smoke it real quick and be like, ugh, couldn't walk and be like, ugh, and man, then it makes me sick afterwards.
Mike, you know what I get high on?
Life.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
So if you love what we do, we'd love for you to support us through Patreon or Apple subscriptions. Also, I didn't even tell you this, but on Patreon, you have free trials now.
Oh, sweet. Because that was something that Apple did for 3 days you would get it? What is Patreon?
I'm pretty sure it's 7 days.
Oh, okay. So
So
you could really binge because we do have a lot. I was going to say a SHIT ton, but I'm trying to curb the swearing on this podcast.
Good thing most people can't swear and don't understand what you're trying to say.
So a crap ton of bonus content. So if you're looking for some extra content, you can head on over there and just get a free trial. See if you like what you hear, then continue on.
And if you don't, then just keep on moving. That's fine.
Yeah.
We're not for everybody.
No offense taken.
I'm drinking out of my brand new Darth Vader mug. I put it on Instagram and people thought it was pretty cool, or at least I thought it was pretty cool. Got it from Disney World. So our whole family was walking by in, what was it, Tomorrowland?
It was in Tomorrowland, I think right outside of Space Mountain, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was the exit to Space Mountain, and it was just staring at us. We're like, oh, this is pretty cool.
And Mike is not one to buy things, so when he was interested in it, I was like, okay, I guess he's buying this.
Well, the other thing that really tipped me over is our son was also like, yeah, that is cool.
Yeah, I said that cup is going to be found rotting under his bed.
That's the downside. Somebody commented, I can't, like, it has these crevasses inside, crevices.
Did you just say crevasses?
Crevasses, I don't know.
No, I'm sorry.
I was trying to have some fun.
No, nobody says
fun.
crevasses.
We can't have fun on this
We
podcast.
will not have fun because you know what I do? I take Mike's fun, and I put it in the center of my hand, and then I squash it.
It's like a bug.
Yes.
And so she'll continue to do so the rest of my life. But yeah, it's got these crevices, and if our son takes like a latte and brings it into his room and forgets about it, like he does to everything, it's going to have some mold growth to it, unfortunately.
Ugh.
So that's going to suck. But
I tell you.
Yeah. So Allison, I know we got a lot of feedback last week. People loved that the Allison's Amazon addiction was back.
Yes.
You wouldn't happen to have purchased anything else from Amazon, have you?
Oh, come on. And again, I will remind our listeners, maybe you're new here, and Mike goes on and on about how much I buy on Amazon, but I don't physically go to stores. I do all of my shopping online. So all of my essentials come from Amazon. So one of the things I've been using, oh my gosh, for months and months now, I'd probably say a solid 5 months, I have been taking collagen. And it's not just any old collagen. It's called Verisol collagen.
Oh, Verisol collagen.
Verisol.
That sounds really fancy.
I think mine is from Germany. But anyway, it is basically the same as collagen, except the molecular size is smaller, meaning it is more readily absorbed by our bodies. And you know, us girls or humans of a certain age, we might be losing some of that skin plumpness, elasticity, and we got to do what we can to keep it.
Yeah, you're losing a lot for sure. You need it.
I've never gone and gotten Botox or something, and I'm really trying to hold it off as much as I possibly can.
Hold off Botox?
Yes.
Hopefully it's, forever.
Well, we'll see, because I'll make that decision by myself.
I'm not telling you what to do.
It's an expensive pill to swallow.
Oh, yeah. And it's not swallowing pills. It's just injecting pills.
Just injecting thousands
of dollars every single time.
Inject it into my face. I imagine it'd be somewhere around 500 or so at least if I went. And it's like what my coworker and I were talking about. Once you go, you're in for life.
Right. And it's only going to be more. It's like, well, now we got 6 units. Let's bump it to
6
7 units. 10.
No, I think on average it's somewhere around 50.
I'm just lucky I know what a unit is.
And just looking into it briefly. But anyway, I'm trying to do whatever I can without getting Botox and keeping my skin looking good. But this collagen seems to have helped every night before bed. I mix it into my nighttime drink, which is tart cherry juice, magnesium, these antioxidant vitamins, and then
that you got free from my mom because you kept buying them.
Your mom was on a subscription. She's like, I just keep every month. I'm getting these vitamins.
She's got like 6 months of these vitamins that are what, $50 a pop or something?
They're expensive, and I'm like, okay, lady, these are running a little low.
So
Send them on over.
Allison, you can just take them. She won't even know.
She gave them to me. I didn't take them. I'm certainly not going to take anything from your mom without asking. But again, this item can be purchased on Amazon. It's a 2-month supply. It's a little pricey. It's like $35.
A lot of details we don't need.
And don't cut me off, please.
I'm trying to say, let's keep this thing going.
Oh, whatever.
Okay? So yeah, we'll put the link in the show notes if you want to take a look. And we don't it's not an advertisement. It's just something Allison uses and wants to share with you guys. So
every day,
anytime like we have anything that just like, oh, cool, our listeners would love this. I mean, we've got a couple thousand people listening every day. So yeah, may as well share the wealth.
Yes.
Anything else going on?
Oh, I don't know, Mike. Am I allowed to talk, or are you going to cut me off?
If you become boring, I'll let you know. But you're like collagen and then the 2-month supply and blah blah blah.
I'm sorry, but the female listeners might want to hear this.
Yeah,
so
go ahead, sound off in the comments if that was useful to you or not. Go ahead in the Spotify, YouTube, whatever. Just go ahead, comment because then it helps.
No, because I don't want anyone to say anything nasty about me.
That's fine. I'm the only one that reads them. Well, no, you read the comments.
I
too.
do some of them.
Yeah, you just don't reply.
Well, on Instagram I do.
Oh,
so are you ready to get into this?
I am.
All right, so this is a case of the Eastburn family murders. And today we're stepping back to May of 1985 when a quiet neighborhood in Fayetteville, North Carolina was shattered by an unthinkable tragedy. The Eastburn family, Katie and her daughters, this is Kara and Erin, were brutally murdered in their home, leaving 20-month-old Jana crying and alone for days in her crib.
Oh, that's so sad.
And what followed was a decades-long saga of grief, suspicion, and justice that all hinged on one single subject, which you will learn much about, as well as a dog named Dixie and DNA that would not stay silent. In this episode, we'll unravel the haunting case, one that took 3 trials. Not 1, not 2, but 3. So that's why it went on for so long. It includes a death sentence and unanswered questions, in order to reach its still controversial end. So in May of 1985, neighbors of the Eastburn family realized that they hadn't seen the family in days. And with this, they also noticed that there were newspapers piling up on their front porch. And this was something that was not normal for them. So they started growing concern for the family's well-being. And at the same time, Gary Eastburn, the father and husband of the family, he was away for training for the Air Force, and he had been unable to reach his wife for 2 days at this point. So neighbors of the Eastburn family made the decision to walk over to their house in order to investigate. And as they got closer to the house, this is when they could hear the cries from baby Jana coming from inside. And despite the fact that they were knocking on the door, no one was coming to answer their knocks. So after local police were notified, they were met with absolute devastation within the home. So, what we come to find in this house is truly tragic because we're talking about 3 people here, 2 of which are children. So in 1985, the Eastburn family consisted of parents Gary and Catherine, who went by Katie, as well as their 3 daughters. This is 5-year-old Kara, 3-year-old Erin, and a not yet 2-year-old Jana. She was 21 months. So after meeting in the early 1970s at a softball game for singles, it was truly love at first sight for Gary. He was just smitten as a kitten with Katie, and he admits that he fell quickly, madly in love. So after years of dating, the couple went on to marry in 1975, and then they had their first daughter 3 years later. So while Gary worked his way up to captain within the U.S. Air Force, Katie stayed home and she was taking care of the girls. And the arrangement just truly worked perfectly for the family. They had a happy marriage. They adored their girls. And Gary was eventually stationed in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where this case takes place. That happened 2 years earlier in 1983, where he worked as the chief of air traffic control. And he was aware that his family would stay in the area just as long as it was needed. Just like the nature of the military, you're going to have to get up and relocate frequently whenever they need you to.
Yep.
So Katie was known to be a very compassionate person. She was very quick to make friends. She had a strong sense of family value, and she just naturally was a nurturer. She cared for others. This made her a fantastic mom and wife. And because Gary was so frequently away, you could basically say that Katie was oftentimes single parenting it. 2 young children, to 3 young children, I should say.
Yeah.
Which it's not very easy.
No, it sucks. I mean, it's great. It's a blessing.
Wonderful.
It's a blessing. It's fantastic, but it can be a lot sometimes.
It's a lot. Being a mom is a lot. I did not stay home with our kids because I was working full time. So once they were like 12 weeks old, our kids started going to daycare. And, you can judge one way or the other. That was just what worked for our family. But, at work, you can clock out and take a lunch break. You can go take a walk, but that doesn't happen when you have 3 young children. You're always on. You're always available. It's a very thankless, hardworking job. So hats off to all you stay-at-home moms out there because it's not easy, or dads. So, this worked for the family. And like I said, oftentimes Katie was being the single parent to their 3 young daughters, yet she remained resilient as well as supportive of her husband and always made sure that her daughters felt absolutely nothing but love and security. So as the Eastburns settled into their new home in Fayetteville, they quickly made friends, and the community really came to adore them. So, however, after 2 years, when they settled in this area of North Carolina, Gary is now receiving word that he would be needed in the Royal Air Force in England.
Wow.
So this is another move that the family is gearing up to do again, but this is obviously a much bigger move.
And that's what really is hard about the military. You're always moving, like you mentioned earlier, and they kind of have to become good at, assimilating and getting friendly with people. Otherwise, like, you can't really, do anything once you move into a new place.
Right. You have no connections otherwise. So you kind of have to be very outgoing and friendly in order to have any sense of community. So Katie was a little reluctant to make such a big move, since she worried about being so far away from her family who was living in Kansas. And obviously she's got these 3 young girls that are now going to be taken away from the grandparents, seeing them grow, because with little ones, they grow so quickly and they change so fast.
Yeah, 5 years is a lifetime.
Right. So Gary, of course, is trying to paint this picture. He's talking about the English countryside, which I've yet to be and visit, but one of these days,
looks beautiful.
I will get there because it just looks so exceptionally charming and beautiful. So he discussed with Katie, the fact that the girls would maybe even be able to ride horses along the English countryside. And she started to come around to the idea and obviously agreed. So despite the fact that Gary was based out of Fayetteville where they were living, he was actually stationed at a training facility 500 miles or 805 kilometers away from where his family lived. So he was in Montgomery, Alabama. And it obviously wasn't easy to be away from his wife and young daughters, but the family made it work, and they tried to stay in contact as much as humanly possible. Keep in mind this is 1985. We don't have cell phones. It's not quite as easy to text and call and all of that. So they set up a schedule where basically every Saturday he would call in. They had this set time, and this is when he would check in with his wife and chat with the girls. So as Saturday, May 11th, 1985 rolled around, Gary did what he always did on Saturdays, and he called home. But this time, he was unable to reach Katie, and it sounds like they had a set time so that she was sure to be home when he called.
This is also 1985, so you had to be home with a phone. Like, it wasn't no cell phones or anything.
Right. So the following day, which just so happened to be Mother's Day, this is Sunday, May 12th, Bob Seafelt, who is the Eastburn's neighbor, he was the one that was starting to grow concerned because he was very much used to seeing the family mill about. Katie coming and going with her girls, seeing them outside, and he hadn't recalled seeing them since Thursday. This is 3 days earlier. And again, he's growing suspicious, so he's looking more closely, and this is when he realizes that the newspapers were starting to pile up out front.
And that's a good neighbor. Like, you could say what you will about nosy neighbors. We have, a couple nosy neighbors or whatever, but all the close ones to us, like, they will sometimes just be like, hey, your garbage bin's out. It's been out for a couple days. Or, they might be like, oh, I noticed that the car was gone for a couple days on the weekend. Did you guys go somewhere? It's like, they're not meaning to be nosy, but it's also good to have that neighbor, just people watching out for each other.
Yeah, for sure. So at the time, Bob was initially assuming that maybe Katie went out of town with her daughters, but at the same time, her Toyota station wagon was sitting out on the driveway. So unless she got a ride with someone else, the odds of her having left were unlikely. So Bob was accustomed, like I said, to seeing Katie and the girls. So, not only that, but it was Katie's routine that every day when the newspaper was delivered, she would bring it inside. And that wasn't happening. So this is the point when Bob decided to walk over to further investigate. And as he got closer, he's ringing the doorbell. He's hearing Jana crying, but nobody's answering the door. So he was alarmed, and he instructed his wife to contact the local police, and he waited in front of the Eastburn home to wait for authorities to arrive. So when the sheriff's department arrived, this happened 15 minutes later, they initially believed that maybe Bob was just mistaken, since at that point in time, the house was quiet. They did not hear any cries from the baby inside. So Bob had also contacted the Eastburn's babysitter, Julie, and she also confirmed that she had not heard from Katie in a few days. So when Julie came to the house, she was peering through the home's windows, and she called out to everyone that she could see baby Jana inside. So once officers entered the home and walked through, they confirmed that, oh yeah, the baby's here unattended. So they cut the screen, they got in through a window, and once inside, they passed Jana to Bob through the window for safekeeping so that they can continue on through the house to see what is going on. So as the officers made their way into the living room, they saw a pair of jeans as well as a blouse with 2 buttons that were ripped and torn, as well as a pair of torn underwear. This was all in the living room. So they could not ignore the number one alarming thing in the situation was the distinct odor of death that hung heavily in the air. So they were standing in the hallway, and the officer was able to see that there was a dead body laying at the end of the hall, and he immediately radioed the homicide unit. So meanwhile, Bob and his wife noted that Jana looked ill. She was crying out, and it was clear that she probably had not eaten nor had her diaper changed in days. So, of course, this family is so concerned for this little girl. So they brought the baby to his house, and when they gave her milk, she hungrily drank it down. And she was so dehydrated and hadn't eaten in so much time that she drank the milk so quickly that it caused her to vomit.
That's what I was wondering. So, yeah, obviously the first thing you worry about is hydration.
Right.
And then hunger. And she's got sores all over her, I'm sure. It's just terrible.
Just heartbreaking. So as Jana was being cared for, the police were met with an absolutely gruesome and tragic scene inside the Eastburn home. As they entered the primary bedroom, they first came across the body of 3-year-old Erin. She was laying on one side of the bed, and part of her face was covered with pillows, and she had a slash wound to her neck, as well as multiple lacerations to her chest. And 32-year-old Katie was lying on the floor next to her bed. Pillows were also partially covering her face. And like Erin, there was a deep slash wound to her throat. She also had 15 lacerations to her chest. She was naked from the waist down. Her pants and underwear had been cut from her body based on what was seen in the living room, and this was suggestive of a sexual assault.
Yeah.
So 5-year-old Kara was found under her Star Wars blanket in her bedroom, and her throat was also slit. Sure. She, just like her sister and her mom, had multiple lacerations to her chest as well as her side. Autopsies proved that the cause of death for each of the 3 victims had been stab wounds, as well as a large slash to each of their necks.
That is just
brutal.
Brutal. And you like the smell in there and these cops, obviously the poor victims, but also the police officers in there. It's just like everywhere you turn and you see something under blankets or whatever, it's like, it's going to be a horrific scene. And so sad for all these girls. So sad.
So you could think back that, the last time anyone can confirm seeing the family was Thursday. This is happening on Mother's Day, ironically and sadly enough. That's Sunday.
You wonder how Jana, the baby, made it alive.
I know. It's a miracle that she did.
Because Erin was 3 years old and Jana was almost 2. So
it had been about 3 days since she would have last eaten. And it could have been late that she had eaten on Thursday.
No, she was 2 years old. I'm saying Erin was 3 years old.
Yeah.
Jana was 2 years old.
Oh, you mean survived the attack?
Yeah, I don't know why she didn't. Yeah.
Maybe because she was in her crib at the time and wasn't there coming about. So there were defensive wounds found to the victim's hands and forearms, and markings on Katie's wrists indicated that she had been bound at some point. The binding had been taken off at the time her body was found, but that's what they saw. So when Gary was told by his colleagues that a detective was on the phone for him, his heart just dropped. Since he knew something just didn't seem right, since he hadn't been able to talk to his wife on Saturday, and then she still hadn't called him back at that point.
The first person calling you back as a detective from the sheriff's office, and it's not going to be good.
And he recalls saying how many of them are dead. At the time, he was only told that there was a death in the family and he needed to come home immediately.
That sucks, man. And it's like, I get it, maybe, kind of, but like, can't you just tell the guy what happened? And a part of him probably doesn't want to know. I mean, he does, it just maybe, because in his mind, if he doesn't hear the words, they're not gone yet.
Right.
It's just like, I know, you already know something horrible's happened.
And they're doing this, not telling him for compassion reasons, because they know he still has to get on a flight and travel back.
Of course.
So, of course, he took the first flight back to North Carolina. He headed straight into the police station, and then this is when he was given the truly unimaginable, life-changing news that his wife and 2 young daughters were not only dead, but had been brutally murdered in their own home. And I always say that there's just something about terrible things happening within the walls of your own home, because I always say that I'm a homebody and our house is truly like our safe haven. And the fact that somebody came in, a stranger, came in and violated that and brutally murdered this family makes it all the more chilling and terrible. So when detectives spoke with Julie, this is the family's babysitter, she told them that she was sure that Katie had a stalker. And recently she'd been receiving prank calls for months before the murders. And during these calls, the man on the other end of the line was highly inappropriate and was talking about doing sexual things to Katie. So after authorities searched the Eastburn home, they noted that all of the window and door latches were unlocked. But again, this is 1985. That was pretty routine back then.
Yep.
So evidence proved that the majority of the attack as well as the struggle had happened in the living room. Of course, we know that's where Katie's clothing would have been torn off, in that room. And when luminol was utilized, the walls and floors lit up, which told investigators that the killer had actually tried to erase evidence and attempted to clean up the blood, because it was blood that wasn't visible to the eye.
Well, I mean, it's going to be almost impossible with how many slashes he did.
Of course. So considering the degree of violence involved in Katie, Erin, and Kara's murders, there would have been, like you just said, a lot of blood left behind. Though the killer clearly tried to erase the evidence, they had not done a very good job. Investigators located many fingerprints, as well as a single Caucasian pubic hair, as well as blood-soaked towels that had been used to clean the scene of the crime. Tracks were located both in and outside the home, and DNA evidence was found inside Katie's body after vaginal swabs revealed the presence of sperm that had been deposited within hours of her death. So after the triple homicide, the killer left 21-month-old Jana unharmed, but she was down the hall in her crib, left to slowly starve to death, where she sat and laid nearly 3 days before she was carried to safety.
I wonder if, like, he didn't even know that that girl was there.
It's possible,
It
but
saved her life in that
it
case.
very much so for sure. But the fact that 3 people were murdered and this was highly vicious.
Yeah, a lot of noise.
I would
obviously.
imagine, yeah, that it would have been pretty scary and noisy in that house. And come to find out, more evidence suggests that maybe one of her sisters came into her room and told her to be quiet. You'll find that out in a second. So Gary was asked to do a walkthrough of his home in order to determine if the killer had taken anything. So he noticed an envelope was missing that would have contained somewhere around $300, as well as Katie's ATM card and a piece of paper with her PIN number on it. And he explained that their family dog, Dixie, had been rehomed after Katie put an ad in the local paper. She felt like because they were gearing up to move to England, that the dog was on the elderly side, that it really wouldn't be very healthy to relocate her on such a big move to England, and that it would be a more compassionate thing to find a local home. So Gary had said this happened because obviously the dog wasn't there, but he wasn't sure because Gary was out of town who had adopted Dixie. So 21-month-old Jana was eventually taken to a child psychologist, this is Helen Brantley, in order to begin working through the trauma that she'd survived. She was able to express to the doctor that her house was scary and that she needed to hide and be quiet so that the man wouldn't get her. So with this information, the psychologist believed that Erin and or Katie had likely come into Jana's room to warn her to hide and be quiet before they were ultimately slashed and stabbed to death. It's unclear if Jana had witnessed what happened, but there's no doubt that she heard terrifying things happening to her mom and her sisters. And when Jana was shown a photo of her mom in order to trigger her memory, it was so sad to read, but the traumatized little girl kissed her mom's photo.
Oh, God, that's so heartbreaking.
So heartbreaking. So on the same day that authorities had been called to the Eastburn home on Mother's Day, they spoke with a man named Patrick Cohn. So he worked as a janitor and started his shifts very early in the morning. So he told investigators that when he left his girlfriend's home, it was right around 3:30 a.m. on Friday, May 10th. This is 2 days before the family's bodies were discovered. And when he went outside, he saw a tall, blonde-haired white man with a wide nose and a mustache that was leaving the Eastburns' home near Fort Bragg.
Wow, that's pretty distinctive.
Right. So the man was wearing a members-only jacket as well as jeans and a knit cap, and he was carrying a trash bag. So as he walked past Patrick, he actually spoke to him and said, leaving a little early this morning, before he climbed into a white Chevette and drove off. So Patrick sat down with authorities to do a sketch with an artist. This happened on Tuesday, May 14th. So with this, a composite sketch was created and it was eventually released to the media so that the public could see it. And with this, people soon started coming forward with information about the case. So one woman told investigators that she had seen a tall man with a mustache and blonde hair who was withdrawing money from an ATM. And we know about that envelope, that Gary thought was missing with the
ATM card and the PIN number. Yep.
So investigators discovered that Katie's ATM card had been stolen and utilized. So it was used on Friday, May 10th. This happened at 10:54 p.m., as well as Saturday, May 11th at 8:56 a.m. In both times, the maximum amount of $150 was withdrawn, meaning that this killer would have taken a grand total of about $600 from the family.
Between the envelope and the two different
transactions. So 3 minutes after Katie's card was utilized that Saturday morning at 8:56 a.m., this is when the witness utilized the ATM. And this is, she's saying she saw a man fitting this description. He was wearing camouflage pants and he was getting into a small light colored car. She couldn't definitively say, it was a Chevette, but it matched the description. So in the meantime, Julie, again, this is the Eastburn's babysitter, she gave authorities more information about the newspaper ad that Katie had placed in regards to rehoming their family dog Dixie in order for them to move to England. So again, they thought that this would just be better for their older dog. This was a red setter to find a local home. So what she did was she placed an ad in the classified section of the Beeline grab bag, the Beeline Grab Bragg for Fort Bragg. So this is a newspaper that served the local military community in the area around Pope Air Force Base as well as Fort Bragg. So while Julie was babysitting one day, she got a phone call from a woman who had the name Angela. So Angela explained that she was interested in adopting Dixie. She'd seen the classified ad, and this was only a couple of days before Katie and her 2 daughters were murdered. So investigators started to wonder, are these 2 instances connected with each other? So during her conversation with Angela, Julie jotted down the woman's information so that when Katie came home, she would be able to contact her. So when investigators started looking around the house for this note that Julie had written, they were unable to find it. Now, did Katie potentially throw it away? It's unclear. So on Wednesday, May 15th, this is 3 days after the Eastburn family's bodies were found, a woman named Angela, her last name is Hennis, as well as her husband, Tim, they were just having lunch together, eating and watching the news. So with this, they saw a special broadcast announcing that investigators were on the lookout for a man who drove a white Chevette and had picked up an English setter from 367 Summerhill Road during the previous week. So Tim indicated that, he's sitting there eating lunch with his wife, Angela, and they're both, shocked as they're watching this, realizing this is the house we just adopted this dog from in the very home that they got the dog from. And not only that, but what car do you think Tim drove?
Chevette.
Yes. So Angela and Tim decided to drive to the law enforcement center in downtown Fayetteville with their infant daughter in tow. So not only did they confirm that they were the family that adopted Dixie and that Tim Hennis drove a white Chevette, but on top of that, he strongly resembled the composite sketch.
That sucks.
That Patrick Cohn had created, based on the person that he witnessed leaving the Eastburn home at 3:30 a.m. Friday morning. So when Tim spoke with detectives at the station, he explained that he had met the Eastburn family on Tuesday, May 7th. This is 5 days before Mother's Day when their bodies were discovered. So he said, he went to see the dog, talk it over with his wife, and lo and behold, they decided to adopt Dixie. So shortly before 9 p.m., Tim parked his white Chevette in front of the Eastburn's Brick Ranch house that had black shutters. Again, this house was at 367 Summerhill Road. So as Katie answered the door, Tim would have towered over her because he was a big guy. He was 6'6".
Okay.
So as they began to make pleasantries, Katie explained that she had just put her daughters to bed. He indicated that he decided that he liked Dixie, so he took a leash with him that day, assuming he'd probably want to adopt the dog. With this, he said, okay, yep, we'll take Dixie. And he led the dog away with the leash, drove away, and that's that. So police believe that the family had been murdered sometime between Thursday night and early morning hours of Friday, May 10th, because neighbors can recall seeing Katie on Thursday evening, and then the newspapers started to pile up right around Friday morning. So 27-year-old Tim Hennis was a husband. He was a new father to his daughter, Christina, and he was also an Army sergeant. So he, of course, is sitting there and he's continuing to speak with investigators because this is pretty damning.
Absolutely. I mean, he's tall and looks, all those looks that they were saying of the Chevette. I mean, it's all adding up. He's definitely been there. He knows them, like he's connected. It's just, okay, let's try to prove that you're not the guy, basically.
Right. Because obviously at this point in time, he would be the number one suspect.
Yeah.
So he admitted, obviously he'd gone there that Tuesday to get the dog. And then he said he had called Katie later that same evening, Tuesday, in order to touch base with her and just let her know how Dixie was settling into their home.
Yeah.
And that's normal.
We
you
did
would
the same
expect
with our
that.
cat.
Yeah. So Tim was immediately on edge. He asked officers if he needed to obtain a lawyer. But police tried to chill him out and assured him that it was just a routine interview. So when questioned about Thursday, the night of the presumed murder, because again, I say it's sometime between Thursday night and Friday morning, he indicated that he had driven his wife and daughter to his in-laws' house, and then he had come straight back home, only stopping for gas.
Okay, so nobody can vouch for where he was.
Exactly. So with the fact that Angela and their daughter Christina, well, of course, the daughter was an infant, she couldn't have said anything, but Angela is out of town now, so there's not a lick of a person who can say, that he has an alibi.
Which would be a tremendous opportunity to do something bad.
Right, exactly. So detectives noted the arrogant, impatient way in which Tim Hennis just answered their question and just interacted with them. However, he did stay there and talk to them without a lawyer for 7 hours. He did allow investigators to obtain his fingerprints, saliva, hair, and blood samples, and he maintained that after he left the Eastburn home with Dixie on Tuesday, he had never seen Katie again. He did say now there's more stories are coming out because, again, of course, he said that he called Katie Tuesday night, just say, oh, Dixie's doing well. Well, then he's saying that Katie called him on Thursday night. And this is the very night that investigators believe that she and her 2 daughters were murdered. And he said that she called to see how Dixie was doing and how she was getting along with their other dog.
So this is new information. It's like, oh, you didn't mention that you talked again Thursday.
Slowly but surely, more information is coming out. And at the same time, police are realizing, though, that Tim is very smart. He was a highly intelligent man, and I don't know what the scoring is, but he scored a 128 on an Army General Aptitude test. So this placed him in the 97th percentile.
Wow.
So they believed that no doubt this guy was hiding something, but it was going to have to be that they're going to have to be crafty to catch him in any kind of slip up. So while Tim remained at the station, he's sitting there speaking with officers. A photo lineup with 5 pictures was arranged in a manila envelope and presented to Patrick Cohn, who had seen this man on Friday morning leaving the Eastburn home. Right away, very quickly, he pointed out, yep, that's Tim. That's the guy that I saw outside of their house. He said that he was positive that this was the guy he had seen Friday morning. So after speaking with investigators, Tim was allowed to leave the station and go home as there was no arrest warrant. But they were positive they were looking at their main suspect, their only suspect.
Yeah.
So they began speaking with people who were familiar with Tim, including his neighbors, who told police that they had recently seen him burning items in a barrel outside of his house.
Okay.
He was tending to this fire over the course of 5 hours. And this is just damning because they had never seen him do something like this before. So a local dry cleaner also came forward and told investigators that Tim had come in one day after the murders to have his members-only jackets cleaned. Once again, this is another damning piece of evidence because Patrick Cohn specifically said that the guy leaving the Eastburn home was wearing a members-only jacket.
And again, when he was leaving the home, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, right?
3:30.
Something crazy. Like super early, nobody else would be awake at this time.
Right. Unless you have a job that puts you out that early, people aren't just milling about the neighborhood at 3:30 in the morning. And that's why it was so standoutish to Patrick Cohn.
Yeah. He's like, I'm going to take note of this in case something happens.
Right. So when investigators spoke with Tim's landlord, he indicated that Tim was late with a rent payment. And this amounted to $345. And lo and behold, he brings in the check right after the murders. And we do know that police would have immediately thought back to the fact that not only did the man who stole Katie's ATM card take out $150 times 2, but then also $300 from the envelope. So now all of a sudden, Tim has money and he's bringing in the rent check. So all these things are just building up to paint a picture.
Yep.
So with this information, they were able to arrest Tim Hennis and charge him with rape and 3 counts of first-degree murder. So he was quickly offered a plea deal for 2 counts of second-degree murder with a likely penalty of 2 consecutive life sentences.
Okay.
So he refused, and he said that he was not going to plead guilty for something that he simply had not done. So with this, he told police to test the samples that they had taken from him to prove that he was not the man responsible. So when police initially spoke with Tim, he indicated that he dropped his wife and daughter off at his in-laws. Yes, he stopped for gas, but otherwise he went straight home. Now police are learning that's not true. So they're finding things that he's not being consistent with what he actually did. So once his wife and daughter were safely out of town, he actually stopped and made an unannounced visit to see a former girlfriend named Nancy Mazer. And he knew that Nancy would be home alone because her husband was deployed in Germany. You know, we're talking about a military base. A lot of husbands were deployed at this time.
Yeah.
So during their visit, of course, Nancy's telling investigators this. Nancy reached over and tapped on Tim's wedding ring and asked him how his marriage was going, because she's probably thinking, what in the hell are you doing here?
Yeah.
This was an unplanned visit. You know, she's married. He's married with a young daughter. And he lied and told her that he and Angela had split up, that Angela had left him. Regardless, Nancy was not going to allow things to go any further, so Tim left, disappointed that he didn't get some.
Have some, he had some expectations and didn't pay off.
Right. So with this information, now investigators know that Tim lied about his whereabouts. And why would you lie? If you had nothing to hide, why would you lie?
Well, I mean, he did go to see a woman. I'm just playing devil's advocate. You know, a woman that wasn't his wife. Clearly, he's after something else.
Yeah, like he didn't want his wife to find out that he was potentially going to stray.
Yeah, and you're not going there for any other reason besides trying to get some. And this guy just reeks of one of the, like, I'm sure there's more stories that are going to come out about this piece of garbage, but go ahead.
So investigators believe that he goes over to Nancy's hoping to have something happen between them. And when she rejected him, he was frustrated. So he went to see another woman who he knew would be home alone. This would be Katie Eastburn, because he was fully aware that Katie's husband was deployed, or not deployed, but out of town, off base. So perhaps he stopped by to proposition her, and maybe he became enraged when she rejected him. And they were aware that he was known to have a short fuse. He had a temper, and he'd actually only recently stormed out of a local Bennigan's. He worked there for just, supplemental income. He had gotten into an argument with his coworker and I guess just stormed out of the restaurant.
Okay.
So since the murders happened in 1985, though, DNA technology was still in its infancy. So the blood came back inconclusive because there was so much of it. And the fingerprints and hair were also inconclusive.
That doesn't make any sense. It's like too much blood. It's like, sorry, maybe take a smaller sample. Like, I don't know how that works. I'm sure there's like science reasons behind it, but it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, this was just so long ago.
Yeah.
So despite the fact that now they don't have any solid physical evidence inside the Eastburn home, they, still regardless, the prosecution wanted to move forward with the trial.
Yeah, you got to get them. You got to get the murder instrument or something else just to say definitively. Like, Is there a good chance? Yeah, beyond the shadow of a doubt. Especially with being placed at the residence that night that it happened.
That's damning.
Well. Yeah.
And he was carrying a garbage bag. The time frame fits completely. That is damning.
He's lying about a lot of things.
Yes.
Clearly wants to go after something.
He had no alibi that night. So the trial began in the summer of 1986. This is just about 1 year after the murders. The lead prosecutor described what happened in the Eastburn home that night as utter madness and one of the most tragic things that ever happened in this country. Dozens of photos from the crime scene were shown to members of the jury, and then Patrick Cohn took the stand and identified, yep, that is the man that I saw leaving the Eastburn home Friday morning, May 10th at 3:30 in the morning.
And as long as Patrick holds up, I have a pretty good feeling, but we'll see.
So after 10 hours of deliberation, what do you think the jury came back to find Tim Hennis?
Well, you already told us it's going to be a few times, so I'm going to say not guilty.
They found him guilty on all counts. 3 for first-degree murder and 1 for rape.
Oh, okay, good.
So before he was taken from the courtroom, Hennis removed his wedding ring and told his lawyer, give this to Angela, tell her I love her. And 3 days later, he was sentenced to death.
Nice.
So Hennis was moved to a prison in Raleigh, and in the meantime, his lawyers were preparing an appeal. So now 8 weeks later, he's receiving this strange letter that was postmarked on July 8th, 1986, the very day of his sentencing. And it read, Dear Mr. Hennis, I did the crime. I murdered the Eastburns. Sorry you're doing the time. I'll be safely out of North Carolina when you read this. Thanks, Mr. X. So authorities never learned the identity of this Mr. X. Who the hell wrote this letter? We don't know. Well, we have no idea. However, the sheriff also received a letter from Mr. X. They didn't say what was in the contents of the sheriff's letter. I assume pretty similar. So after grappling with this sudden and violent loss of his wife and 2 daughters, Gary was understandably struggling to move on. He canceled his plans of moving to England, but then finally in 1988, he did accept and move abroad with Jana. So months after he is now settling into his new home of England, he's all of a sudden, contacted and told he needs to come back to North Carolina after Hennis's appeal reached the Supreme Court. So what happened was his lawyers argued that because of the graphic crime scene photos that were shown, the prosecution had inflamed jurors against him.
Oh, God.
So this is what I mentioned to you. I was like, this is absurd. I don't understand how a fact, the photos from the crime scene are shown to jury members, how that can be inflaming the jurors against him.
Well, I'm always trying to take the opposing view and try to understand it. So I imagine because there's a severe emotional attachment to seeing something so heinous and just horrible. So obviously, like, it almost reminds me of when I had a speech that I had to do in college, and our professor said, "No, you went after like things that are too emotional." And I was like, "But these are all factual."
Right.
I don't want to say what it was, something very up in the air. But it was. I could see where he's coming from. It's like, clearly you're trying to make your point with these horrendous facts, and it's more about the facts themselves than they attach it to this person. But I guess it all depends. Like, any jury, it's supposed to be like, do you think they did it beyond a shadow of a doubt? Yes or no? Like, it doesn't matter how bad it was.
Beyond a reasonable doubt?
Or a reasonable, thank you. I always mess that up. But I can see it a little bit, but I've never heard it before.
Yeah, to me, it just seems absurd. Not that I'm aware of, but again, facts are facts. Like, this is what the investigators found in the home. This is what this man is being accused of.
This was the scene.
Right, exactly.
They're not like posing it in a horrible fashion any more than it already was.
Right. So Hennis was awarded a retrial after the judges voted 5-2.
You got to wonder, like, did he have connections somewhere or something?
I don't know.
I doubt it, but crazy.
Yeah. So as Hennis's lawyers worked to prepare for now a second trial, this happened over the next 3 years. They were preparing. So they placed their focus on discrediting their number one witness, Patrick Cohn.
Yeah, as long as he stands up, we're good.
So his lawyers, when I say his lawyers, Tim Hennis's lawyers were referring to Patrick as a thief and a liar. So between the two trials, Cohn had been convicted of crimes. This included attempting to use a stolen ATM card, public intoxication, and obstructing an officer, as well as driving a car with an expired registration.
Oof.
I don't see, though, what those... I mean, I guess if you're stealing, are you a liar? But facts are facts. If you say, I saw this man... and then he works with a sketch artist to, get a picture who looks like Tim Hennis, I don't see what the problem is.
You can paint all sorts of things.
Yeah.
You can say that the police maybe steered him towards this and had a guy in mind already. All these stories, they're all just stories.
So Patrick's charges had been dismissed, but Hennis's attorneys wanted to suggest that the man's testimony during the first trial was inaccurate. So during his testimony, Cohn said that the weather on the night of the murders was fair and the stars were out when he left his girlfriend's house. However, a meteorologist called in by the defense showed records that proved that it had been cloudy that night. A local helicopter pilot also came forward to say that he was actually forced to abort a medevac mission that morning because it was so dark and overcast.
Interesting.
Now, do the clouds sometimes part and one's cloudy sky is now clear? Of course.
Maybe he looked up and saw stars or whatever.
So Detective Jack Watts felt that despite Cohn's issues, he never doubted his account of what he had seen on the night of the murders. And regardless of the trouble he had been in with the law, he came forward. That's how strongly he felt that what he saw that morning was related to the murders. And, he came forward to report what he believed was valuable information in the Eastburn family murders. So before the retrial, the original prosecutor left the district attorney's office for private practice, so now new lawyers were appointed. And Gary Eastburn just didn't feel very fond of these lawyers. He described them as listless in comparison to the original lawyers.
So not caring?
Yeah, just kind of lazy maybe. So while on the stand, Gary confirmed that 2 months before his 3 family members were murdered, Katie had received threatening phone calls in the middle of the night. The man knew her name and told her that he was coming over, which is threatening.
Yeah, I was curious about this too. If they turned out to
we
be
never
this guy.
come to find out though who placed those phone calls.
That sucks. Nowadays it'd be simple to figure it out.
Right. So now also the jury members are hearing about this letter that Tim Hennis received in prison by this so-called Mr. X, who was the one who really committed the murders.
By the way, it's definitely Tim sending these out somehow, some way. Like, even though
right,
he
but
was in
how?
jail,
Do you think he wrote it ahead of time and had his wife send it in
probably.
or something?
Yeah, he seems manipulative.
And again, very intelligent.
Right.
So the defense also honed in on the fact that weeks after the murders, the woman who had come forward to report seeing a man that fit Hennis's description who used the ATM and then climbed into the little car told investigators that she didn't remember anything. However, on the eve of the first trial, she allegedly assured prosecutors that she had seen a tall blonde man get into a white compact car, something that Hennis's lawyers felt was highly suspect. Like maybe she had been coerced to do so. I don't know.
Yeah.
So 2 new witnesses testified during the second trial. One woman indicated that while she was out delivering papers, it was 1:45 a.m., she had seen a long-haired man driving a light-colored van in front of the Eastburn home. And then a teenage boy who routinely walked along Summerhill Road where the Eastburns lived. He routinely walked late at night. He said that he was walking at 3 a.m. on May 10th, 1985. So they brought this boy into court and onlookers were stunned because he looked exactly like Tim Hennis. So they're basically suggesting that Patrick Cohn had seen this teenager and not Tim Hennis.
Wow.
So the defense also presented footprints that were located outside the Eastburn home that were 3 sizes smaller than Hennis's shoes. However, could the footprints been completely unrelated?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're just trying to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks, and be just to get that enough of a doubt, a possibility of a doubt.
Reasonable doubt, yeah.
Yeah.
So they also talked about a spot of blood that was found on a bathroom towel that did not match Hennis's blood. And then they referred to the lone pubic hair that was located near a couch in the living room, which also did not match any of the family members nor Hennis.
That's interesting too.
So in regards to the fire that Hennis tended to after the murder, none of the charred remains were able to be traced back to the Eastburn home. But what in the hell was he burning in there, you know?
Right.
So his members only jacket lacked any blood stain, or any blood stains, I should say.
It was clean.
It was clean, but an analyst from the International Fabric Care Institute testified that Verisol, which is the chemical that is used in dry cleaning, is unable to remove all traces of blood. So on April 10th, 1989, Hennis took the stand in his own defense, and he admitted that, yes, he found Katie to be a very attractive woman. And when he was asked why he initially, told investigators that he'd come straight back home after driving his wife and daughter off at his in-laws, rather than the truth that he had stopped by Nancy Mazur's house, it wasn't because he didn't want his wife to know about a potential affair. He said that he'd simply forgotten.
That's worse.
Worse.
What crazy? Like, I don't know. I like to think I'm a decent liar sometimes. I probably would have said I just didn't want my wife to know.
But again, he is an intelligent man, so why he wouldn't have just said what people would expect? I didn't want my wife to know I was potentially going to stray.
I don't know. Maybe he's way smarter than I am. So maybe just think like, just kind of push it to the side.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So both sides rested 1 week later, and then 2 days later, the jury came back with their verdict. And what do you think? They found him.
All these things, not guilty.
Yep. Not guilty on all counts.
The defense is way more aggressive. And it seems like, they said the prosecutors are listless. And so they're probably just laid back like, I don't know. What are we going to do? They didn't have their whole heart into it. And then you got the defense who's just going after it like crazy,
right,
bringing up all these questions. And it's like, there's definitely a lot of question marks.
Reasonable doubt in the second trial. So after he had spent more than 800 days on death row, Hennis was now a free man. And he was free to go now be with his 4-year-old daughter. This happened in April of 1989.
Okay.
So meanwhile, Gary Eastburn told a juror that he still fully believed that it was Tim Hennis who had been responsible for killing his wife and 2 daughters. He said, regardless of the verdict, in my heart, this is what I will continue to believe. So after his acquittal, Hennis decided to re-enlist in the Army, and he received 3 years of back pay, a good conduct medal, as well as a promotion to staff sergeant.
Wow.
Yes. So in September of 1990, he was sent to Saudi Arabia for Operation Desert Shield and came back to the United States the following spring, and he continued to just rack up awards and accolades for his service. So in 1998, Hennis, Angela, Christina, as well as the couple's 6-year-old son, this is Andrew, they went ahead and relocated from North Carolina to Fort Lewis, Washington. And that very year, Gary Eastburn just incidentally also moved to Washington.
Weird.
And totally unaware of this, but they settled only 15 miles apart from each other. Just
crazy.
ironic.
Yeah.
Completely unaware that he was close to the person that he fully believed was responsible for killing his wife and two daughters.
Yeah.
So after the second trial, Gary went to England. He met and married a British nurse. He left the Air Force, and then he moved back to the United States a few years later. And despite the fact that they were in close proximity to each other, he and Hennis, they never did cross paths. So Hennis became his son's troop leader. He took the boys on hiking trips and on snow caving adventures. He went on to retire from the Army in July of 2004 after he had served 23 years with the rank of Master Sergeant. And with this, he began working at a waste treatment facility. So now it's May 12th, 2005. This is the 20th anniversary of the day that Katie, Erin, and Kara's bodies were found in their home. So with this, a group of North Carolina detectives gathered together to discuss the case. There was a homicide detective present that was presenting the case on advanced criminal intelligence techniques. In the meantime, they also brought in a man named Scott Wisnant. He was the author of the 1993 book, Innocent Victims, The True Story of the Eastburn Family Murders. So they basically utilized his book to help develop the course and just kind of get his input in the situation. So this author is speaking with homicide detectives from the Cumberland County Department. This is Larry Trotter, and he basically mentioned something that hadn't been explored. And this was a very, very important piece of the case.
They're like, wait, what'd you just say?
So during Katie Eastburn's autopsy, you'll remember that I mentioned that they recovered sperm from her body.
It was weird that you were saying that instead of other words. Yeah.
Excuse me. So 2 sperm samples were taken with a vaginal swab, but since the crime occurred in the early 1980s, DNA testing was not at all evolved.
Yeah, it was just starting out, basically.
Right. So now it's 2005. So Wisnant mentioned, why not send these samples off for analysis now?
Yeah.
Which is weird to me that hadn't been a thought.
Well, maybe it's like, when do you resubmit them? Because it's obviously DNA samples are, and the technology is increasing each year. But it's like, okay, now should we do it? Now should we do it? And then, I'm sure it was closed because the guy was like not guilty. Now that they're looking at it again, it's like, oh my gosh, let's take it for another sample.
Yeah. So Cumberland County detective, this is homicide detective Larry Trotter, who I mentioned. He began to look into this idea and realized that the sperm samples were being held by the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office. So he had those samples sent off to the State Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab in Raleigh. And he learned from them that the sample was sufficient and they could run a DNA test. Wow. So they said, okay, we're going to do it.
That's crazy. 20 years later, they still had a usable sample of sperm. That's crazy.
So now 1 year later, it is 2006. This is 17 years after the day that Hennis walked free from the prison. They get the results back.
Well, clearly guilty. Otherwise, we wouldn't be telling the story.
And the DNA profile belonged to none other than Tim Hennis.
Yeah, match. Holy cow. That's insane. And that sucks so bad for
so
this
you
family.
think that this guy got to live his life free. He got to have another child. He was out on troop events with his son's, Boy Scouts.
Being celebrated as a master sergeant and just like, rising the ranks, looking like a good old guy and just a rapist, murdering scumbag.
Yep, murdered a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a woman who was the mother of the children, and left a 21-month-old baby in her crib to die.
I want to cut his body up into little pieces. It's so horrible. What a garbage human being.
Just sickens me that this man got almost 2 decades of his life that these girls were robbed of. Yep. So with the evolution of DNA testing, the wrongfully convicted have been exonerated while the guilty have been identified. So with this news, the Cumberland County District Attorney immediately contacted Gary Eastburn. However, because the Fifth Amendment ensures that no citizen can be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb for the same offense, the state of North Carolina is talking to Gary and they're like, there's nothing we can do.
Our hands are tied.
Nothing we can do with Tim Hennis. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So,
I'm just
however,
waiting. I'm waiting
there's
for
a
you to say
loop
more.
here.
Okay.
Under the dual sovereignty doctrine within the Constitution, a defendant can be tried and acquitted in a state court and then tried for the same crime in a federal court.
Oh, because he was let off in the federal court.
Right.
Or a Supreme Court of some sort. Okay.
So with this, on September 26, 2006, a military lawyer and agent from Fort Bragg's Criminal Investigation Division, along with 2 police officers, went to Tim Hennis's home. So at this point in time, he was living in Lakewood, Washington. So he was given orders to report to Fort Bragg within 30 days. So the following
30 days, like it shouldn't it be like 24 hours or like 6 hours? Like
I know,
now.
right away.
I mean, you're a murderer.
I
Let's
guess
go.
at the same time, they're trying to follow procedures.
Yeah.
So the following month, Hennis reported for duty after the military made the decision to take over the case. So on March 17th, 2010, this is nearly 25 years after the family members of the Eastburn family were murdered, their 22-month-old baby left for dead, the court-martial or military trial of Tim Hennis began.
Wow.
So in order to convict, 2/3 of the jurors who are known as members in a court-martial would have to agree on Hennis's guilt. In order to secure a death sentence, the jurors would have to unanimously agree. So that's how they would have to sentence him to death. So the difference in this trial from the previous 2 was the DNA evidence, which is rock solid.
Yep.
So, which according to Hennis's attorneys, though, they were going to meet it head on with reason and logic and critical analysis. So by this time, Hennis's daughter...
Like, sorry to cut you off, but it's like, nah, nice try. I mean, I don't know where you're going to go with this.
Some of the things the defense attorneys will say in rock solid cases, I want to just be like, just shut up.
Yeah, that's
just shut up.
Right.
So at this point in time, Hennis's daughter, Christina, who had only been a newborn at the time that all of this was happening, she is now pregnant with her second child. So Gary Eastburn, despite the passage of so many years, found himself very emotional because all of this was just dredging up all the grief from 25 years ago, as well as the anger that he felt towards this man. Because again, all along, Gary believed that they had the right man and that, oh, well, he's walking free now. So it all came back rushing to full force to Gary, and he was just disgusted when at one point, Tim Hennis actually fell asleep at the table during the trial.
Okay.
Who does that?
I don't know.
So Jana, this is Gary's surviving daughter. She was now 26 years old. And despite her young age at the time that her mom and 2 sisters were violently murdered, the loss had left a true mark on her life. Because she was so young, I think I mistakenly said 22 months. She was 21 months old when her family was killed. She was so young that she doesn't even remember them.
Right.
So, our dog almost just fell off the couch. So with this, she doesn't feel the same sadness that everyone else carries. And instead, she feels guilt for not sharing those same feelings.
Yeah.
And she recalls visiting their graves, and while others present were weeping with grief, she stood there and kind of felt nothing.
She doesn't remember them.
No. So it was obvious that the person who was responsible for killing the Eastburn family had known to clean up after themselves. Despite the fact that it was only 1985, this is a time when they wouldn't have known about DNA evidence. The person did leave one important thing behind, and that was his sperm. So the defense argued that maybe the sample had gotten contaminated and even suggested that perhaps Katie Eastburn and Tim Hennis had engaged in consensual sex.
That's their only hope.
Right. When he came to get Dixie. And that would have happened on Tuesday night or sometime between then and the murders.
If he was smarter, he would have said that we did have sex Tuesday.
Right. And he didn't.
Yep.
So the members of the jury themselves were often deployed because these are members of the military. So they, when they're deployed, they're forced to be away from their spouses and significant others. So they were not likely to be fond of the implication that military spouses are frequent adulterers.
Yep.
So there was no evidence whatsoever to suggest that Katie had been forcibly raped. However, according to studies, 7 out of 10 rape victims suffer no physical injury during sexual assault.
Well, what kind of injury would she have?
If it was very forcible, could there be tearing and things like that? That wasn't seen. But again, in 7 out of 10 cases, 70% of the time, there is no sign of that.
Well, I'm sure most times it's just like, all right, just go and then get out of my house, or like whatever.
Right. So the medical examiner indicated that the abundant and intact sperm had been deposited into Katie's body shortly before her death. He was unable to specify an exact time frame, but explained that after a day or two, sperm start to diminish and disintegrate. Hennis had always denied having any sort of relation with Katie at all. He denied the fact that they had consensually been together. So during his second trial, he testified that after the conversation with Katie about the dog, he never saw her again. Yes, he spoke with her a couple times on the phone, never saw her again. So during the third trial, he did not testify in his own defense. So on April 8th, 2010, after 3 hours of deliberation in a third trial, the jury came to a unanimous verdict.
Unanimous?
Unanimous.
Well, death penalty in that case.
Well, this is just for his guilt.
Okay, so guilt, yeah.
Yes.
Guilty.
They found Tim Hennis guilty. So next, they need to decide if he would be sentenced to death and discuss the fact that more than 20 years had passed since he was exonerated, in which he was able to live as a productive member within society.
Yeah.
So during the sentencing phase, Gary Eastburn took the stand and he spoke about how much he missed his wife and his 2 daughters despite the passage of more than 2 decades. And his current wife, this is Liz, she was there. And in a way, he said that he almost felt like he was betraying her.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she didn't feel that way. Like, this happened. He lived this life before he met her.
Well, he's a good guy, you know.
Yeah.
He feels like you shouldn't have to go through this. You know, I'm going through it on my own. He's a protector. You know, he doesn't want his current wife to feel that. Yeah.
I get it. So 1 week later, the panel delivered the verdict and made the decision to sentence Tim Hennis to death.
Wow.
So he was sent to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and he was also dishonorably discharged from the Army.
Hell yeah.
So the last military execution took place in 1961, so a long time ago.
Yeah.
So you cannot get executed without presidential approval. So he is under strict confinement. He is allowed outside only an hour a day, and he normally spends this hour alone.
So that's the only way that the military will do a death penalty is through execution?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so many unanswered questions remain in this case in terms of some of the physical evidence that can't be explained at the Eastburn house. You know, this includes unidentifiable DNA that was located under Katie's fingernails, as well as those shoe prints that were found outside the house that were 3 sizes smaller. The way that my brain worked, though, is, you know, this evidence may have been there some other way.
Could have been there weeks ago,
Right.
like from a rain, and somebody, you know, some kids or an adult stepped onto it, a delivery person. It could be anybody.
So it could be completely unrelated to this case.
And it is.
So in October, one of Hennis's attorneys argued that the same time of the court-martial, the military's jurisdiction over Hennis had expired. So this could have potentially voided the outcome. So in May of 2011, Gary and Liz Eastburn sold their house in Washington and they moved back to England. And he has mostly tried to put the murders behind him, and he can only hope that at the very least, Hennis will remain in prison for the rest of his life. In February of 2020, the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces rejected Tim Hennis's appeal. The murders of the Eastburn family is a case that spanned decades, 25 years. And, you know, these shocking murders happened in 1985, all the way to Tim Hennis being sentenced to death in 2010. You know, you think of the turmoil that Gary Eastburn and any of their loved ones had to live through throughout this time. Gary and Jana Eastburn have rebuilt their lives amid lingering pain, while Hennis sits at Fort Leavenworth, his fate still tied to a rare military execution process. With DNA as the final word, this haunting tale leaves us pondering justice, evidence, and the shadows that linger when evil strikes a loving home and a loving family. And that is the sad case of the Eastburn family murders.
Man, sad for so many reasons. Obviously, the most obvious is the murders themselves, and then these people that have to live with this not having an answer for so long. And then you got Tim Hennis, the human pile of garbage, who ended up having a pretty decent life for most of his life. And then his daughter, who's living with it and then procreated. So unfortunately, some more of his DNA is crawling around this country.
He had 2 kids.
Yeah, but his daughter also had kids.
Yeah, I don't know if his son had kids, but, you know, they're innocent of this. They have a monster of a father.
Yeah, and like I said before, like genetics always play a part. So you got to like watch out for your kids. Like if they're showing some aggressive behaviors, like they might be like their grandpa.
You know what's interesting though? You know, Tim Hennis was, what did I say, 27 when this happened? he had no criminal record before that. And then he went on to live 17 years plus free. Also showing a clean record. Like, what the heck happened here?
I would also think that he'd be capable of doing it again.
And the question is, did he? Did he do anything?
Just so...
Before and after.
Especially like killing children. Like
children.
I mean,
that is
killing
the biggest
anybody,
thing.
Don't get me wrong, is terrible.
Terrible.
But I mean, these innocent little girls.
You're talking about 3-year-old and 5-year-old precious little girls that he viciously slashed and stabbed.
Like not once or twice, like all of them repeatedly.
That is a monster. And that question always brings up to me is like, how could they go the rest of their days without doing something violent?
Or at least not being caught.
Not being caught, possibly.
And,
so,
maybe using his power as a master sergeant in the military. Like these are all what ifs. Yeah,
and again,
obviously.
very smart man.
Yeah.
But what gets me is that this a-hole had almost 2 decades to go out and live his life because we didn't have the ability to test that DNA.
You wish you could rewind and like take away his life, but you can't.
I was so frustrated when I was researching this case, although I am thankful he is in custody now.
Yeah, for sure.
But, my hearts are with the Eastburn family. I'm just so sorry for their horrible losses that happened back in 1985. It's just so sad.
Yeah, thanks for telling the story.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. We appreciate the heck out of each and every one of you. We thank you so much. And like we talked about earlier, if you are looking for bonus content, there's plenty there, over 100 episodes. But we would gladly take you into the Crime and Coffee Couple family.
Yeah, I dare you to go try to start a free trial.
Ooh.
Yeah, I dare you. I double dog dare you. So that means you have to do it.
Triple.
Whoa.
Triple dog
She
dare
pulled it
you.
out. Wow. How
Christmas
about that?
story.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice callback.
Well, we thank you guys so much. Do you have anything else to say?
I do. So you're going to look into this camera at the very end, okay? Because we started with a new camera. So go to YouTube, check it out, see if it works.
Yeah.
Oh, that one's pretty blurry. Hopefully it refocuses. I don't know. I'll check it out. So it probably is useless.
Yeah, so we probably only have one camera on this episode.
Next one, we'll try it.
And so if you see me looking off in the distance while I'm talking, it was supposed to be at a camera.
You didn't see that was blurry?
No, I wasn't. I'm paying attention to the case. I'm not looking at that.
Well, the next episode, we'll have a new camera. Watch out. All right.
I tell you, it's a process.
Hey, we're keeping it real.
Exactly. Well, thank you guys. And until next time, bye.